Coming up in episode 21 of Netball Unlocked, we're joined by Mikki Austin to look back at round 11 and look forward to round 12. We debate the week's news and talking points. Plus, there's an England squad to dissect, and if we're lucky, Chloe Merrill will make it back in time from her holiday to join us for that. Hi there and welcome along to the latest episode of Netball Unlocked. And as is now becoming tradition, when Chloe is on her travels, Olympic related or otherwise, I turn to the people I call my netball comfort blankets, the people who help me learn about the sport and love the game, having arrived to it as a tennis, golf and darts journalist. So with that in mind, it's hello and welcome to Mavericks assistant coach and Epsom College Director of Netball, Mikki Austin. Mikki, how are you?
I'm very well, Brenda. So it's usually me coming to you for advice on some far-reaching sport that I have no knowledge of, and I'm trying to dive into. So it makes a change for it to be the other way around for once.
It's the complete opposite right here, because you know everything about netball, right? You're one of my oracles when it comes to netball.
Yeah, I've been called a lot of things. Oracle is probably a first, and I'll absolutely take it.
Firstly, how are you? What are you up to? You're obviously one of several people in the sport who are juggling several kind of jobs and, as we like to say, wearing several netball hats. So, how's it been for you this year?
Yeah, I'm good. Life is good. It's treating me well. No complaints. It's busy. And as you rightfully say, there's a lot of different plates spinning. But I mean, such is my life. I would never have it straightforward, would I? So on half term at the moment from my role as Director of Netball over at Epsom College. But obviously London Mavericks stuff, we are right in the thick / coming towards the back end of the business season, as they would call it. So I had training this morning and all week. So yeah, no, it's been really good. It's been a big change from what was my normal for the last 6 years, and before that, what was my playing career for almost half of my entire life. But yeah, it's been good. And I mean, one thing sport teaches you how to do is roll with the punches, right? So change is inevitable, and I'm really lucky that I've fully landed on my feet.
How have you embraced the Director of Netball side of it? How have you found that? Because for a school, that is, we obviously know you kind of Surrey Storm as franchise director and head coach, but obviously kind of doing it for a school has been, I should imagine, quite different.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like got so many similarities and then so many different nuances. I think obviously being director of netball at Storm stood me in really good stead just to understand how broad the spectrum is and what there is to cover. But dealing with a school institution, particularly on the scale of Epsom College, is very different. So it's took me a while. You know, I started in September. It's taken me a while to learn the systems, learn the intricacies, the different kind of channels to go through. Before I went full-time at Storm, I was actually involved in a school institution called Putney High School. So I had some understanding of the school system, certainly in this catchment area. So I wasn't coming to it completely green. And that's, again, like been really, really useful when it's come to my job role this year. But yeah, Epsom is so vast. It is such a big institution. It sort of covers all ends in terms of high performance, you know, really pushing the top end of the spectrum. However, what it is really well renowned for is that every single pupil, every single girl plays netball. So on a Saturday morning in netball term, we have 31 teams and almost 450 girls playing the sport on a Saturday. And I think that is incredible. Separate to the performance side of me, I guess what I'm a huge advocate for is females in particular being active for life. And I cannot champion that message enough. So as I say, I really feel I've slid in really nicely because Epsom is a sport for all kind of sport school, as well as really trying to push its boundaries on the name being up there with your really well-known netballing institutions in the national netball field.
Interesting. And we'll get into Mavericks in a little bit more detail in due course, but how have you been able to marry those two things up? Because obviously we're Camilla in a head coach role and Tam's in as sort of franchise director. There's sort of three of you with so much Super League experience. So how has that whole dynamic worked for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's been amazing. As I say, I've really landed on my feet. Obviously, I knew what was the old Mavericks because that's where I started my playing career, and the old owners in Gloria and Jim, who are still in our crowd now. It's like a real full circle moment for me. I used to play with Camilla back in the day, so we have a previous relationship from that, and I've obviously been under Tamsin before as a player at Storm. So yeah, so I think that the netball world is so small, isn't it? And it's got this weird way of your connections coming full circle at some point. You just don't know when that might be. Yeah, this time last year, things for me were in a very, very, sort of tumultuous landscape. I didn't really know what my Super League future looked like, and as much as I really hoped it would continue at some point, that was all sort of out of my hands. I think for me, I back myself in any environment, but I back myself in that context. I know that this is what I'm good at, and I know that my talents in terms of the coaching space over the last 6 years have grown and developed, and I would hope in any environment I would be a value added. And fortunate for me, Mavs really thought that I could come in and make a difference in terms of the direction of travel that they was trying to go this year with the rebrand of London Mavericks, trying to be really innovative, trying to be really almost outspoken with what we wanted to achieve and not fearing speaking that into existence. I sort of came in and wanted to make a real big impact on the cultural piece around the club, and I think I did a really good job at that in Surrey Storm. That was really important for Tamsin and Camilla to have as an asset within the group this year. And yeah, it's been great. It's certainly been probably a big change for all three of us. We're all pretty dominant in what we want, but I think there's been a really clear vision from the outset. Tamsin as franchise director has been really clear in what she wants in the direction of travel, in what that looks like in our designated court areas, etc., etc. Cam has obviously been the head coach at Mavs for a good few years now and knows the players really well and has a great relationship, and again knows what she wants and knows what she's looking for. So I think for us it's just about being flexible where we need to be flexible, taking ownership of the areas that we've been given. For me that was the defensive end this year, and really stepping into that space. And then it's we've got a really great working relationship when we're not scared to check and challenge each other when we need to, because we're all on a common ground in order to same direction, common goal, common values. So that stood us in really good stead this year, and I think the proof is in the pudding.
I was about to say that, but we'll get to that in due course and chat about a little bit more. But we got a little bit of news. We try and rattle through a couple of headlines if there have been any. First of which sort of came out yesterday, and that's that Siggy Berger's out for the rest of the season. That's another really tough one to take. You guys at Mavs have had your fair share of injury problems this season. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but there were 3 games in a week for Panthers last week as well, which feels tough. That maybe speaks to something that might be kind of resolved or thought about at the end of the season. But obviously it's always tough when you lose a player, even if it's just for the final weeks of the season.
Yeah, look, I mean, you're right. We've had our fair share this season, but that doesn't make it any better or any easier to stomach for anyone else. And certainly what we have to remember is there's a player in the middle of this. So obviously thoughts go out to Ziggy, and no one wants to see anyone get hurt. Losing a shooter, and I can tell you this from experience, towards the back end of a season is a real big out. So that will be a challenge for Panthers. I guess the juxtaposition of this season is that with squads of 10, everyone has had to use every member of their squad to get us to the point where we are now, staring down the eve of round 11, 12.
12.
Yeah, staring down the eve of round 12. So whilst Birmingham on one level will say, well, we've ran combos without Ziggy so far, it is also just a real kick in the stomach, isn't it? And yeah, I think there'll be some exploration done this season in terms of the injuries. I don't personally feel it's because of squads of 10. I get that they've had a really rough go of it last week, with 3 games in quick succession. However, if you are within an international setup or in an international program like Ziggy has been for a number of years, you're staring down the barrel of a commies next year when you're playing back to back to back for almost 12 days. So it's really hard to say whether that is a factor. Obviously, there's travel involved, and maybe a bit of external factors, working, not camp based, etc., etc. Of course, all needs to be explored. But I guess these are the challenges where we're trying to push the sport into that professional bracket. Whilst we are a step closer to that, the reality is at the moment on the ground we are still varying between that semi-professional. So naturally, there will be some casualties along the way, but a tough gig for Panthers, that's for sure.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting at the weekend when they played Pulse. They obviously kind of down the stretch went with sort of Betsy and Gabby Sinclair, and you're right. It does change the dynamic slightly, and they're going to have to kind of rethink how they go about that. So we'll talk about preview stuff in a moment. But the big news, I suppose, just because we record today, is that the England squad's out. I know you were on a training court this morning, so you may not have had a chance to look at it. Before we get into that, we asked George Inga last week about her own kind of experiences around England. What were yours like, Mikki? Because I think what we've tried to get across over the last few weeks, at least since we kind of knew the squad was coming, is it's very much a bit of an opt-in kind of situation nowadays as well for players. They kind of need to make their decisions as to whether they're going to go forward in the international setup. So I don't know how it's not. I don't want to insult you here, but it was a little while ago now. But how did you go about it when it came to England?
Yeah, look, I mean, I can't speak from personal experience. I was never good enough to break that barrier at a senior age group. Dabbled in a bit of England stuff at an underage level, but yeah, as I understand it, the process is essentially any player across Super League gets the opportunity to essentially put their hand up. And yeah, as you say, it would be called an expression of interest, but they can opt in, if you like, to be considered for selection. And then there is a selection panel from an England netball perspective. They would have one for a full-time programme. They would have a different panel that looks at the age group selection process. And they score players. They go round, they look at footage, they watch games in stadium, and they give players a score. And then they would sit in a room and they would collate all of those scores along with their opinions, along with the direction of travel that they want to take the team in over what is going to be the next cycle or the next 2-year cycles. And they come out with their selection decisions. So yeah, I mean, what a day to come on a podcast and chat about it. And if you think it wasn't the talk of training this morning, then you are sorely mistaken. But yeah, I think the really interesting thing, and I'm not sure there's a way to solve it, is the fact that unbeknownst to the general public, the players have known about their individual selection decision for a good couple of weeks now. And if you look at that in the Super League calendar, that falls in a really, really critical time for you guys as clubs. And whilst nobody else knows about it, you've got individuals in your own environments battling their own challenges, whether that's because they know they've been selected, they know they haven't been considered, they know that they've been in the programme for the last God knows how many years and have now potentially not got what they wanted. And sometimes that plays out unknowingly in performances. And it's a really interesting dynamic if you're us and you know about it and you sit back and you watch. Us as clubs also have no idea of the wider selections. You know, we might have an inkling if we've got relationships in various other environments, but you only ever really get the full list when it goes out like it did today. So we're all sitting there dissecting it as well. It's a really interesting one.
How was training then this morning?
Training this morning was great. I mean, as I say, the girls have individually known for a while. And I am certain, like most other environments, because the relationships between the players internally within your own squad is really, really high. They've all been conversating about their individual journeys for the last couple of weeks. So I think by the time it gets announced, the players are in an accepting place about it, good, bad, or ugly. It's almost about how we as clubs wrap around the players when it does go back out again today, because it's almost like reliving that feeling all over again. What is appreciated though is in previous years that selection has gone out around a game, and that as a coach is a real headache to try and manage. So very much appreciated that it's at least just on a training day.
I think as well, to your point there about sort of players opting out, the only one we know publicly at least who's kind of said that she opted out was Taylor McKevitt, who was pretty open about it on social media. I think from a headlines point of view, it's worth pointing out that Halima Adio and Sasha Glasgow are kind of back in it, and that was after sort of a year out. Jazz Brown, Emma Rayner, Anya Williams, and Yomi Wilson are the sort of four elevated from the futures squad. So I suppose that's a talking point in itself, Mikki, that the kind of fluidity between the two squads, and obviously for yourselves at Mavs to kind of have Raz and Ellie in the sort of senior party, and then Susie Liversidge, Izzy Phillips, Kira Rothwell, and Emma Thacker in the future. So as a franchise, you must be super proud of that in the first instance.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's nice for me to sit here and say, as a franchise, there are, 5-6 players who are in and around that England Rose setup. That's an incredible testament to the players and the hard work. And I guess us as coaches and the work we've done with them, particularly the likes of, a Susie who hasn't been in it before and, is an absolute jet, by the way. She's had a standout season. So players like her, Cassie Howard, to get the nod after the performances they've put in all year long, it kind of gives you justification, solace, hope, I guess, as a neutral, that you go, okay, well, working really hard, getting your head down, performing really well in an NSL season is looked at. On the other side of that, you've got players who, have potentially come in and therefore have dropped other people out. You've got your Anya Williams in there this year, and then that means that your Emma Thacker has missed out or is in futures, for example. And there are loads of other examples of that. But, you have to think about the longer term vision from an England netball perspective. They're not just thinking about this cycle this year. I guess we have to believe they're thinking long term. There's a bigger plan afoot in their minds about the next generation that's underpinning who's coming up next. Whilst there is a really hard balance that, we're a netballing nation and we want success, right? We don't want to be thinking back to the Commonwealth Games gold that was almost a decade ago now. We want to be thinking about next year and what are our chances. And in a really competitive landscape, you look at the South Africans that are competing week on week this year. It's really hard to not put their name in the mix as a nation in that commies bracket. A Jamaica who, arguably will be out without a couple of really big players now. Jodie Ann Ward, recently doing her ACL. Shamira Sterling, who knows the return frame of her coming back from pregnancy, is that doable for her? There's a lot of variables in that. So we want England to be right up there, right? So yeah, it's a really interesting position.
Yeah, and I think as well, a part of that is kind of trying to expose athletes at the right times, which I get is a balancing act, and that's something you'll kind of be aware of at Super League level. So giving them that exposure to the right environments, the training environments. We know we've got Commonwealth Games. There's a World Cup not so far away. As was announced earlier on today, there's also kind of a Youth Netball World Cup as well. So plenty of stuff to challenge and to think about as we move forward. But also, like I think always, whenever you hear any international squad, it's always kind of a bit of a trigger for excitement and to look at what might be further down.
Yeah, and for mass conversations, right? Some people are going to love it, some people are going to hate it, and that's what it's all about.
You and I have had this conversation for years, and anyone I've kind of been involved with in the game, you want these talking points, right? You want rivalries, you want debate, you want to be able to say someone's playing well or someone's not playing well. Like that's just top level sport, elite sport.
Yeah, absolutely. And netball is netball has been in this famine stage for a really long time, in terms of talking points, but that getting wider than just the netball fan. And I say that, like, people who love netball are obviously going to talk about it. That's never been the issue. The netball community has always championed netball. The issue over the last 5 years has been about reaching other avenues, which I think now in the next 5 years is going to be the real big push for a netball community. So it's feast and famine, isn't it? We want stories, you want villains, you want things that upset the apple cart, you want stories that go a bit rogue and borderline against the grain, because they're the talking points that, good, bad or ugly, we all sit here and dissect and discuss and get talked about on Twitter and get pulled up in podcasts, etc. So I'm a really big advocate for it, have been for a number of years, but I get that's very non-traditional. So if you are a traditionalist, that might be a little bit hard to come around to.
More importantly, when it comes to an international tournament, Mikki, is Glasgow going to have anything that rivals Liverpool's bakeries?
Hey, me and you did a lot of exploring of chocolate croissants. That is for sure. For sure. And I can attest, Liverpool was great for that.
It will. So maybe we'll have to take the podcast on location and we'll have our revolving cast of guests.
Well, I mean, just bring me with you at this point. That's all I want.
Chloe and I have had an I don't know if I should publicly declare this, but an off the record conversation as to whether we have a English white wine, New Zealand white wine, Australian white wine, and South African white wine as part of our kind of Commonwealth conversation. There we go.
Like a hot ones, but with wine.
Like a hot ones, but with wine.
Where do I sign up? First name on the list.
Me and Chloe will confirm in due course.
Okay. I'll wait for the email.
So look, I think that's probably about the gist of it when it comes to news. Chloe is literally on her way back from holiday and might be kind of joining me at the end of this podcast to kind of have a bit more of a bigger picture chat on England. But I kind of got you on to look back at the weekend that's just gone and look ahead. So in terms of looking back, the obvious place to start for you guys is a massive game at Hertfordshire Sports Village. Mavericks 57, Forest 58. I was looking at the stats charts earlier on today, which I'm sure would delight you, Mikki. And you know what? That was your first win that wasn't in extra time since round 5. I think in the first instance, you must be delighted with that.
A win is a win, and we'll take it no in whatever form it comes this season. But yeah, I guess if you're us, we have to look at it like resilience building. And we've said a number of times internally within our own environment and our own circles, traditionally, had we have been in those games last year, I don't know whether a Mavericks team is coming out of it the right side. So there is some real tangible proof for us who are involved that we are on the right trajectory. And I think that's really important if you're us, and that's not to be overlooked. However, having said that, would I love for us to not go into extra time as much? Sure. Would I love to not have to, be jumping up and down out of my seat and screaming like a banshee as much in the last minute and 30 seconds of the game? But that's what the Super Shot's done, right? We are now, and we're not the only ones, most teams / all teams in the league are now looking at deficits of 10 going, that's nothing. We can pull that back in about 4 minutes, or vice versa. You're looking at it going, we're up by 10, that's not enough, we need to keep pushing. And that's exactly what the Super Shot's done. So yeah, I think for us it's been a season of resilience. It's been a season of never knowing when we're too far down to be counted out, and that's been a really positive for us, because that means if we've been in that situation again, we've got this real grit between our teeth. Never say die. No, we can come back from this mentality, and I think that's really positive for us.
You mentioned a little bit when I introduced you that you kind of been doing a little bit with the defence end. I think we'd be remiss to say that keeping Rolene quiet was a massive part of the weekend's result, and obviously a massive third quarter. Chloe and I have debated for some time that you probably can't stop Rolene scoring, but you can stop the ball getting to her. Could you take us a little bit inside how you planned for that this week? Because I think clearly the accuracy was there, but the volume was down for Rolene this week.
I'll start by saying this. It's really interesting, isn't it? And we chatted about this after the game, that every team has a team that, for whatever reason, mentally just can't get over the blockade of, or whether it's because the matchups just suit one way really hard. Like when we played Forest the first time, it was 11. So for us, it's not just about the one performance on its own, although the timing of it, obviously very important, a lot riding on it, etc., etc. I think for us, the matchups suited, and we've showed that because of the home and away split. And yeah, you're right. I think, as with most teams, but Rolene and Forest in particular, because of the threat of the Super Shot, and I mean, that lady is just unbelievable, isn't she, in terms of, it's like Rachel Dunn, but on acid. With the 2-point shots. So yeah, but I think for us it's almost like the Loughborough Lightning of old mentality, and how teams used to prepare for a Mary. It's not about stopping the one individual, because if we think we can sit here and do that for 60 minutes, then you're probably going to end up disappointed. It's about picking out the tactical nuances of the team elsewhere. Where are the connections? Where is the service coming from? Where are they most dominant? And where is it that we need to be really, really sure sure that we can break that down as a unit. I think Mavs this year have been really, really good because the success hasn't necessarily fallen to one person. You know, we're a team that really does share the load massively, and I think that helps. Unless you're a London Pulse who's got a Fumi Fidoju in their locker, who you know is going to be an out and out ball winner. So yeah, I think props to Raz, who this season overall has been absolutely unbelievable. Not just this year not just this round, sorry, but week on week she's been getting better and better. So I was really pleased for her personally. She puts in so much hard work. It's great to see it come to fruition. But I think the tone was set. You know, Izzy Phillips had an absolutely mega start to the game. Really did set the tone and helped in sharing that load. Gemma Donoghue is such an unsung hero in that unit, and typical Aussie does so much grunt and graft work out the front for us, and that allowed Raz to shine, and all of that aided in what was a real good shutdown of the Forest speed in their attack end and the service to their shooting circle, which we needed. If you're gonna shut them down, that's exactly what we needed.
I kind of thought, when I was watching, I was making notes, and I thought the fact they started with Iona tends to hint that Forest maybe are trying to play quick because we know that's their strength, and you kind of forced them out of that stride early, and it felt to me that that's where the tone was set. And yes, of course, the game was close, and Forest had a half-time lead, and that 20-4 third quarter. Just talk to us a little bit about how that came to pass, because those sorts of quarters, and you guys were on the end of one maybe against Pulse earlier in the season, they don't happen too often. So that kind of what was the catalyst for it? What prompted it, and how did you reflect on it?
Yeah, I think half times for us are really, really tactical. We do a lot of analysis on opponent and where we're tracking along. What are the three key areas in defence and attack that we can make a big difference going into the second half? So I think that helped. That came at a good time for us. And I know we went in down at the break, but had it not been for the last 3 minutes of switch off from our perspective, and there was a couple of things in that didn't really go our way. There was like a bobble ball that fell off the back of the court. There was a couple of missed shots in that, so it wasn't really anything structurally that led to us being in that position. So that was okay, we don't need to panic, we're in a good place kind of thing. So that helped. I spoke to them just before they went back out about, and I think it got posted on social media, just about we got a conscious choice to make in this moment right now, because it's going to go one way or the other. Either Forest are going to start gaining some speed and running away with it, or we're going to put our foot down now. Our lot responded really well, and I think the great thing about the third quarter for us is that we played it moment by moment. There was never a moment where any of us looked up at the scoreboard or looked at the score swings and went, oh god, that's 7 now, or that's 8. It wasn't. It's what does this moment require of us right now? And it wasn't until after the game, when we're dissecting stats, it was yeah, that third quarter was a pretty strong showing for us. I think what helped as well is that we had a tactical timeout, Forest didn't. And, there's another nuance to what is a new rule this year, which all teams, us included, are finding the right way, the best way to try and use those tactical timeouts, which I don't think anyone's really used to capacity this year. And, there's an important message around teams starting well. Forest had to use it early because of the start, and therefore, when they probably could have done with another one, it just wasn't there. So yeah, I think for us it was really welcome. We needed it. It was a big quarter performance, and yeah, certainly one that I hope we can replicate on Sunday.
But also, I think, like you said, an all-round performance in particular, it might prove to be really, really crucial come down the stretch. There, no bonus point for Forest as well in that game. Did that even enter your thinking? It's obviously very new, like you said, about sort of tactical timeouts, and we saw sort of in the Pulse Lightning game last week, almost Lightning lost a little bit of control down the stretch, and it ended up allowing Pulse to nick a point, which might be massive. Given you've got a couple of tough games in your final 3, denying Forest that bonus point felt just as important in many ways.
Yeah, look, it's hard, isn't it? Because as a coach, like in the Loughborough situation, you go, we want to expose players, we want to find out, what combinations can do the most damage for us against a Pulse team that they probably think they're going to play again at some point. It's just what's at stake when they do play them, i.e. is it a semi, is it an elimination, is it a grand final, for example? And, that's the coin toss that us as coaches make all of the time. So, but yeah, look, we're inherently aware of what's at stake, and definitely because of the position that we're in, which is a team that has not been in a top four for a very, very long time. We have an incredibly young group who are trying to learn how to win on the job, for want of a better phrase, which is a really difficult task to do. So I think for us, all of those nuances matter. You know, that top four might come down to a bonus point. We don't know. It's been so tight all season long. But yeah, I think for us, we've placed no more greater emphasis on it at this point in round 11 than we have done from round 2. For example, we have always blocked our games from the start of the season so that we know, you know, the run of 3 of games that we're in, where we need to pick up points, how many points in an ideal world do we need, how many can we afford to be without, etc., etc. I think that's really important, because if we only start thinking about it now, on the eve of round 11, back then as it was, when it's a top 4 clash, that changes the mindset completely. And that's a really, really, really tumultuous position psychologically to put yourselves in, I think. So yeah, I think for us it was about, at half time particularly, I spoke to the group about, you know, we was down on the scoreboard then, so we wanted to stay in touch. You know, we definitely wanted a point out of it, but 3 points is absolutely up for grabs. And if we are in a position where those 3 points are within our catch, then it's about really pushing on and having a real cutthroat mentality, because as you rightfully say, we don't know how valuable that's going to be. But look, we're also sitting here going, anything can change. There's still 3 rounds to go. Anyone on their day this season is capable of beating anyone. Forest have already shown everybody that in the last 11 rounds by beating Pulse and beating a Loughborough. So I think it's also just about, for want of a better phrase, just staying in your lane. You know, this is what we can control. These are the fixtures that we're involved in, and making sure we just keep very process orientated rather than worrying about the permutations, because we're never going to be able to control that.
Yeah, that's for netball nerds like us to have to deal with and try and make it.
Well, I'm sitting here with a bit of paper in front of me, which I've written out every single final points tally, top 4 teams since 2011, would you believe it? So I know exactly the permutations and the differences from 2011 to now, and that's because I love netball too much.
I also think it, like the dynamic, as you say, the timing of the game was so big. It does now almost puts Forest on the point of kind of no return. They kind of almost need to win out, give or take. And for yourselves, it's really destiny in your own hands, which is all you want as a team, right?
Well, that's it. I think for us, it hasn't changed anything. All it's done is essentially put us in the driving seat. But then we would say, you know, we've been in that driving seat all season long. It was just, you know, there are certain fixtures we would talk about as being banana skin fixtures, whether that's because it's a long journey, or because it's on a Friday or a Monday, or because it's a difficult venue to play at, or because there are different permutations, wider permutations that are going to unfold as a result of that fixture. So this was just one of those. But, you know, not all would have been lost. We would have had to have told ourselves not all would have been lost had that result not have gone our way. And with 3 rounds still to play, it just would have made the stretch a little bit difficult. But as I say, you know, 3 rounds, 3 games, anything can happen. So there are no celebrations yet.
Absolutely. 2 teams who have booked their place in the last in the playoffs, so to speak, are Lightning and Pulse. And at the minute, it looks like those 2 are going to kind of battle it out for top spot. And we know the new sort of finals dynamic. That might be really important. For Lightning, first of all, a pretty routine win over Dragons. 7 wins in a row now for Lightning. And I think earlier in the season, a few of us maybe questioned what they were going to be, what they were trying to be. We probably should never, ever have doubted it, should we?
It's so funny, isn't it? Loughborough are always the team that, pardon the pun, strike timing wise, form wise at the right time. They do the same thing every year. Their pre-season is silent. You don't really hear anything from them. They go under the radar. Everything's in-house. You know, it's all very quiet while other teams are trying to build anticipation. They start the season, everyone goes, oh, you know, they're still winning, by the way.
Yeah,
still
absolutely.
winning, not necessarily at form, but still getting results. And then they just manage to build and build and build, and they hit form every year at the right time. So this year is no different, but that's a team with a number of years experience. I think since 2017, every final since 2017, and before that would have been in the vast majority of top fours. So I think that's what you get for experience. That's what you get for the large majority of your team staying similar or staying the same, the spine of your team being there year on year. And props to them, because there are a number of teams in the league that you probably couldn't say that for, in terms of they might still be winning but not necessarily hitting form.
I was going to ask you about that, Mikki, because I looked at the same, and the number of consecutive grand finals or consecutive top fours. You guys at Storm were kind of, I suppose, the first team who kind of did it absolutely relentlessly at that kind of top level. We know that sort of over recent years, Thunder have been there as well, but like that just consistency of high performance. How difficult is it to achieve? Like whether you're tweaking a squad or changing a playing style or just keeping those standards so high?
I would say it's nigh on impossible, but it's obviously not impossible because people do it. But that's the dream, right? That is what every franchise is sitting, trying to become, trying to dissect how it's done. But it takes time. It takes time for franchises to build to that point. It takes trust, it takes buy-in, it takes a lot of hard work and a lot of getting things wrong along the way, essentially. And that's, before Loughborough won, they were in 3 grand finals that they lost, and the players stayed in those grand finals. They didn't jump ship, they didn't look for another opportunity, they just stayed and said, next year we'll try and be better. And it didn't happen, and they said, next year we'll try again. And that's how you end up creating this absolute jog of success, because you have the buy-in, you have the trust, you have tiny adaptations year on year, and you're constantly looking at and assessing and going, well, we don't want to rest, how do we get better? And that is some of the most seasoned professional players, that is some of the best players this league has to offer, aren't sitting there going, well, I played and I started, therefore I'm happy. They're going, no, I want to win. And what does it take for us as a club to do that? How do I take a long, hard look at me and get better? Not for me, but for the good of the club. And in order to do that, you have to have trust. So, I think it's possible for any club to be able to do that, but it takes a whole heap of factors going your way and a little bit of sprinkling of luck to be able to do that. So, I have nothing but the utmost respect for your Loughboroughs and your Thunders. And, we used to sit there at Storm and go, we shouldn't be looking at those guys going, oh, for God's sake, they're in another final. We should be looking at those guys and going, what are they doing? And how within our means can we replicate that, for want of a better phrase, or how can we do that better? So I think everyone thought with a bit of changing of the guard at Loughborough things might be slightly different. They've gone to show that their class and their experience is far more reaching than just one player. So I think this final series, if I was a neutral, it's really interesting, with a Pulse team who have been there and thereabouts for 2 years now, and arguably on paper, they've got 9 England players in the list that have gone out today. The only one that isn't in that list is South African. Yeah. So that would be why, that's a really interesting dynamic. Should arguably they be the favourites in this final series, probably. But on form at the moment, I can't really call it. If they do end up making, facing each other before a grand final, that'll be a real doozy of a head-to-head.
Yeah, I do think, and we kind of haven't really got into this yet, but that new makeup of how the finals is going to look is going to make things super interesting. You mentioned Pulse there. 5-point win, 5-goal win over Panthers on Sunday. Panthers finished particularly strongly down there, and only there were a couple of decisions right in the last couple of minutes that could have taken it down to the last seconds. Pulse knew what they had to do. A win took them back top of the table, that booked themselves a place in the top 4. What did you make of the game? I watched it. I thought Pulse were not completely in control, but knew what they were doing. There was a lot of whistle, to use one of Chloe's phrases, in the game. But yeah, Pulse doing enough to come out on top.
Yeah, look, and if you're them, you would say that is all that matters. I am absolutely certain that Sam is sitting there saying, even on our bad day, we win. And, you would say that's a sign of a really, really dangerous team to face. And of course it is. We know the power that Pulse possess within their team and their lineup. And I think it's been really interesting because almost the flip reverse of Loughborough, Pulse at the start of the season, and we felt that effect in full force, were absolutely almost untouchable. And there was talk in the wider community of them going unbeaten. That was the chat on social media. And you really believed it. That, start of the year, it was a real sight to behold and to be on the other side of, I can tell you that. But certainly in the most recent rounds, things have been a little bit stickier for them. It hasn't been as free flowing, even when they're using their unbelievable speed, which we know they have, particularly in their attack lineup. Sometimes that hasn't come off for them for the better. There have been a couple of games where I never thought I'd say it, but they've struggled to find ball. When on earth did you ever think you was going to say that about a London Pulse side? So it's been really interesting to watch it unfold, but they would sit there and say, we're still winning. We are still top of the league. And for right now, that's all we need to make sure we do. And who's to say that they're wrong?
How, this is maybe something to think about in a bigger picture terms, but how much is it almost about timing your position or getting into the dance, as they say in American sport? Like, very much the league is kind of like the precursor to the tournament at the end of the season. I spoke to Karen Gregg earlier in the year, and she was obviously with a whole heap of injuries to battle. It was a case of very much just making sure we don't lose touch, making sure we're in there. And then there becomes a little bit of cat and mouse where you don't want to give too much away and all that when we know that the teams might face each other. So I suppose the bigger picture here is how much will Pulse just be happy with where they are and maybe almost keeping their powder dry a little bit?
Well, that's it. And again, I am certain Sam Bird will be saying it's all part of the master plan, and absolutely there is an element to that, particularly down the back stretch, in the next couple of rounds, maybe this round coming this weekend, we might have another team cemented in that top four. We might get in a situation where we are playing rounds and the top four is set. The league have been in that situation a number of times before. So then it becomes, well, certainly if you're playing a team that you're likely to play in a final series, well, how much do you give away? How much do you tactically go at teams versus just play it and see where we end up? Because you kind of want to hold your cards a little bit close to your chest. However, you also want to go into a final series on form. No one wants to play a semi-final the week after they've just lost, or a game that they haven't played particularly well. Second to the result, it isn't about the result. It's about how are we leaving this court feeling like we've played? How are we going into our training room with what mentality? Are we going into it going, guys, we won, but that didn't look good and we feel like we've got a whole heap of problems to fix? That's a very different mentality from going into it going, look, we were unlucky there. We might have lost the game. However, statistically, in these areas, we did really bloody well. They're very different feelings, aren't they? So there's all of those nuances to it that we as coaches are trying to decipher and, figure out the headaches to behind the scenes. And, it now gets really interesting. So, all of that does play a part in it. All of that is absolutely the conversations that we as performance teams are trying to dissect and decipher behind the scenes. So it's that juxtaposition, isn't it, where, that's why you want to cement your top four position as early as possible so that you can almost make a decision and live with it, that in what direction you're going to go.
You mentioned one more team could secure their spot. I think Thunder are all but there, really. I worked it out a little bit that they would need to lose all three games, not get a bonus point, and there'd be a turnaround of like 100 goals.
I mean, it's still mathematically possible, but is it probable? I don't know. If you're a betting man, I don't know.
I was always told, tell me when it's mathematically improbable.
Well, that's literally that, yeah.
That's kind of what it is. I suppose the most notable thing to come out of Thunder's 69-55 win over Rhinos was Paige Reed back. She was also in the England squad, which I think was notable as well.
Yeah, big week for Paige.
Yeah, how does she shift the dynamic as well? Because I think famously, like now, Thunder have not had in the same team back to back, apart from maybe twice this season. But bringing the experience of Paige back into the squad, and I'm sure she'll just be eased back over the next couple of weeks, she gives them a very serious threat, obviously, in the attack end.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Karen will be very grateful to have one of her injured players back on the roster. I'm absolutely certain, as you say, that there will be a phased return for Paige. It's been a long time that she's been out, and they'll want to make sure they get that right, not for just the back end of the season, but obviously with her being named in the Roses set up, there's a bigger picture at play. And yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because as a coach, you have been managing such a change of personnel and players, and although Thunder and are no stranger to having a conveyor belt of youngies, particularly in that attack end that they just breed, it's very different going into a final series having experience. We talk about that all the time. And it's a bit like us with an Amy Hepworth-Wayne, for example. That experience in a final series almost counts tenfold. So particularly in a shooting end, you want people who in the moment are going to stand up and go, yeah, I want to be the guy. I want to be the one that penalty pass or shot with 4 seconds to go, give me the ball, and I'm going to be able to put that shot away. And they would say that's what they signed Paige for. So to have her back on the eve of finals is going to be a positive for them. However, they've got a management piece of minutes that she's going to be allowed to play into those finals. That's a headache to manage as a coach. Plus, they'll want her to hit form. And in order for her to hit form, she wants to be on the court, she wants to be touching a ball. And they're going to have a couple of young shooters that are sitting there going, well, hold on a minute, we've got you through 11 rounds. I still want you to consider me. But that's a really great headache to have as coaches, right? Let them go at each other in training and may the best woman win.
Nice way to round off round 11, Mikki. I like it. We always want to have a chat with kind of our guests about some big picture stuff. We spoke to you about kind of what you've been doing off the court. I think we've been really lucky to speak to people who were involved in kind of the franchise process last year and have gone on to be successful. Now, obviously, you were part of a Storm side who were unsuccessful. How difficult was that kind of alongside what you were doing? We know that I'm not going to say it felt rushed, even though it did feel rushed for everybody.
Your words, not mine.
Yes, absolutely. I'm the impartial journalist here. It's quite all right. But how difficult was it as a process to go through? And then I suppose in stark comparison to everyone else we spoke to kind of have that, oh no, like this is kind of heartbreak for us in many ways. And a franchise as storied and as kind of well respected and well loved as Storm.
Yeah, look, if I was speaking really candidly, it almost broke me. There was a real period of time where I was really struggling. And there was a lot to that. There was a lot to that. And I keep joking with my inside circle that one day I will write a book about, the last couple of years and how on earth it all unfolded. My golly, I knew I was a strong woman. I really had to live that for the last 18 months or so. I think, look, we all knew that last year there was a really big risk for anyone involved. We all knew that. So no one went into last season with their eyes closed. No one went into it thinking that they was going to be immune. Certainly I didn't. Certainly a Storm franchise didn't. But I think that for us who felt like there was so much good going for us in that tender bid process, there was so, we had the fan base out, the fan base of Surrey Storm was one of the strongest in the league. The community footprint was one of the biggest. The pathway programs was one of the most successful. The NSL team in the most recent years were again right up there. So it was really hard when the final decision happened to sort of get your head around what was it, like what is it that I can put my finger on and say, yeah, okay, it was that. And that sort of left a bit of something unspoken for us that were involved. It was all incredibly quick. It all happened whilst we were playing. There was some internal, battles around those conversations and how it unfolds. And I, obviously being a player myself at the time, have always been very player first. So it's like, how on earth do we navigate these decisions being told? The order in which we tell personnel, players, staff, fans on the eve of us playing games. Like, it was an impossible situation to navigate. And that wasn't particular to us. that was the story that was happening in a Strathclyde Sirens environment, in a Team Bath environment. And it was just sad. It was just such a sad time. The thing that I really struggle with even now, like I was part of Surrey Storm since 2014. It was part of my life for almost half of my entire life. And I gave so much to that club. And I think for me, the difficult thing was that the fans were a real almost forgotten part. You know, it was because it was all so quick, because it all happened so fast through not really any fault of anyone's, and it certainly wasn't deliberate. But it's like, how on earth do we say thank you to this number of people? And as much as it has been such a big part of my life for over a decade, there have been people that have been season ticket holders for 2 decades and over. This is bigger than me. And what on earth do we say to those people? And what on earth do we say to the pathways of young girls who are now staring down the barrel of 2 hours to their nearest franchise in a GCSE year or in an A-level year? And at that point in time, there were no answers. And it was navigating that for me, because I was the human that needed to have all of those answers and just didn't. And I really struggled with that. So yeah, I think it was a really difficult time to navigate. However, as I say, we all knew there was a risk all season long, and professional sport or sport in general, the one thing you can absolutely be certain of is every year something happens that smacks you in the face that you were not prepared for, you won't learn about in a book, you won't gain from a coaching qualification, and you just have to live through it. And that was my learning in that last year. So I think for me, it was about, how do I personally flex? How do I take the lessons that have happened this year and turn it into a positive? Because the only other solution is that I don't be involved anymore. And that is a choice. You could choose to not do that, and plenty of players, plenty of coaches have chosen not to do that. But for me, I didn't want to do that. I felt like I had too much to give. I still feel like I've got a whole heap to give. I'm 30, and I have been a head coach for 6 years. I still feel like I haven't even scratched the surface of what I'm capable of. So it was just about, well, what does that look like for me? And, does that happen immediately next year? Or is there a year where we take a step back and then we try and reintegrate? So yeah, as I say, I'm inherently aware that I am one of the lucky ones that have absolutely landed on my feet professionally in terms of my job as an assistant at Mavs, professionally in terms of my securing my next stage in life, as you like, in terms of the director of role at Epsom. That's a long-term sustainable job for future, which I am so grateful to have. Personally, for me, I'm getting married next year, and you've known me a long time, Paul. That 3 years ago was absolutely not something that I thought was ever going to be in my lifetime. And I am so certain that was sent to me at a time that I really needed it. And I really believe in that whole higher power manifestation stuff. And I'm so grateful to my partner, and he is the best human being on the planet. And there has been so much that have changed for me in the last year, and I sit here now on the eve of, fingers crossed, being in another final series, holding a different role of a franchise, which is the only role across every role that's available I haven't held yet, and being a much, much more well-rounded human being, individual, and I am just so grateful.
That's an incredible way to look at it. And you described it as like maybe something in sport comes and punches you in the face, but it did feel the way that whole process played out. And you mentioned the other teams, not just for yourselves, but it was such a difficult thing to deal with. Like, how did you get the information? Like, first of all, without going all the way back over it, was it just simply a, sorry guys, you're not coming with us for the ride? Like, is it as simple as that?
Yeah, I don't know if this was the same at every franchise. I can only speak on my personal experience. I found out quite late. I'll just say that. And then it was a case of being pulled into the room. This was actually on the eve of a training session, and it was like, right, this isn't a viable product going forward.
Why, Mikki? Were you told why?
No. So yeah, this isn't a viable product. The press release to the general public is going to happen on this date, which was a date that was very, very close. And then it was like, so now we need to work backwards in how we tell people. And you're just like, oh my God, like 20 minutes ago, I'm planning a training session as to how we're going to beat a Loughborough Lightning, who we was playing that weekend, which, by the way, is a hard enough task as it is. And then, and you're just like, well, what do you mean? I think personally for me, I was like, well, I need time to process this as an individual because one, effectively, I've just lost my job and I have a mortgage to pay. And I'm a human who has a life to try and navigate and protect. And what on earth does that look like for me personally? Separate to that, screw me, there are a vast number of other staff members intertwined in this. And what does that mean for them? And they've got families and what's going to happen? And that wasn't something that could be answered at that moment in that conversation, or at least wasn't told to me in terms of like, well, what happens to these job roles and who stays and who doesn't. And then, of course, the players, when do we tell them? We've got about 4 days and there's 2 training sessions in the middle of that. And we want to tell them in person. And I don't want to do that before a training session. But also we finish training at 10 o'clock at night. Is it the right thing to do to tell them after that and then send them in their cars home? Like there was just so much to it. There was so much. The MPA were brilliant. We got them involved straight away, essentially, to help, I guess, as much as possible. The trouble is there is no right way. There was no, because of the time frame of which it went down for us, that it was like, I was going to say a swear word then, but it was like choosing between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
That's the nice way of saying it. So yeah, I don't know if that was the same everywhere. I don't know. And as I say, I think for us, because it was all really rushed, that the bit for me that was really difficult was the fans. Even now, last week I went and did a panel talk about women leaders in sport and how that stands you in, fantastic stead for any career basically in life. And a Storm fan came to that with a Storm pin on, like a badge on, and she was like, I just wanted to come and show you that, like, it's still around and I still do walking netball. And it made me so emotional that, like, 7 months down the line, because obviously it matters a whole heap to me, but it was my job. But to other people, you forget that it wasn't just a franchise and it wasn't just about netball. It was people's happy place. It was their place that they knew they would travel to on a Saturday and sit next to the same season ticket holders for 15 years, and they would meet in the bar and they would have a meal, all of those kinds of things. So yeah, I wish that I could look back and feel really proud and feel really happy of what was achieved, because it deserves that and I deserve that. But I can't look back and feel happy. I look back and I feel gutted and I feel sad. And that makes me not want to talk about it. But then the other half of me goes, Mikki, shut up. That's so stupid. Of course you should talk about it because there's so much to be proud of. So it's so conflicting, but you have to move on, right? And I guess, it was easier for me to move on because I had something to move on to.
Yeah.
And now I'm just so grateful to be involved in another club, and but other people don't have that. What if they don't have an involvement in somewhere else? It would be really easy to see why they're stuck.
Yeah, look, I wanted to say to you, I think I'm so grateful for you for being so honest about it, because I think we've heard from maybe people who were involved in teams that were successful and teams that were unsuccessful is a whole other part. We started this chat by saying, we want to hear about heroes and villains in sport, good points, talking points, bad talking points, horrible talking points. They're part of the course. So look, thank you for honest. And absolutely everybody involved in Storm down the years should be so proud of kind of what was put together. And in the end, I suppose maybe there's some solace in the fact that the decision wasn't yours. It wasn't as if the franchise kind of folded, like, or kind of ceased to be like on your own terms. It was kind of taken out of your hands, which I suppose, without getting too much into the emotional situations, could probably just add more anger can fester when you think about things that way. But
well, yeah, but that is what it is, isn't it? Each franchise makes their choice about, and did do really early, to be fair, about what that whole tender process looked like, who would be involved, who wouldn't be involved. I guess for me personally, I sit here now and go, it's really, do I feel like I could have made a difference to that outcome if I was involved? Probably. But then is that rational? I don't know. Who's to say that's right or wrong? Every franchise made their choice early. For me, when was all said and done, I guess, that was the only solace that, I can sit there and look at anyone in the face and go, I genuinely don't know, because I was not involved at all. Therefore, I don't know. And is that better than having some involvement and it not going your way? I don't know. I guess that's my only solace, isn't it? But it's not. I think I'm clutching at straws there.
But listen, you've spoken so brilliantly about that. But what does the future hold for you, Mikki? You've spoken obviously about getting married, which is super exciting. We've spoken quite a bit about your role as an assistant coach, but what do the ambitions remain? I know, having spent a lot of time with you, that hugely ambitious, brilliantly determined, amazingly motivated. What's the next few years look like for Mikki?
God, that line's going in my Instagram bio. Yeah, look, I'll be really honest and say at this moment in time, I don't have it mapped out. I think for where I am life-wise right now, I'm super, super happy in where I'm at. As I say, I've got the best of all worlds, really, in terms of the stability, the sense of belonging, the sense of direction. At Epsom College, they are also incredibly ambitious in what they want to achieve, and after just 1 year we've made incredible inroads, but there's still so much more that I want to do there and want to go on to achieve. So I think that for me there's a whole heap of work to be done in that space, and I'm really, really looking forward to already getting stuck into a netball term again next season. Look, for Mavs, I think for us it's about all systems go this season first and foremost. We've spoken so openly all year about this year being top 4, and I think this is probably the first year that we've not been scared to speak that into existence and stare it right in the face. And we still haven't achieved that mathematically yet. So that's where absolutely the focus and the intent is. Obviously, we're at the point where we're already talking about next year and what that looks like and things we can do better, changes that we need to make or things we need to continue. And look, if things do go well this year and we do make that top 4, he's hoping, then of course next year we don't want to rest on those laurels, and we want to make sure that London Mavericks is a regular fixture in that top 4 space. And so I think the ambition in me is still burning brightly. I've never been one to just rest on my laurels and say, I'm happy with where I am. So of course I want to keep moving forward. I want to keep personally developing. But what that looks like, who knows? World domination.
Write a book as well, Mikki, as you've already
Write
mentioned.
a book. That's my next thing. Write a book.
Look, listen, it's a good segue to get on to the preview. We kind of always rattle through preview at the end of these because we don't know a huge amount about sort of team news and whatnot, but we kind of know how the land lies. And as you've kind of mentioned there, top 4 has very much been a case of Mavericks target this year. There's a chance that could happen this weekend, like on the road against a Birmingham Panthers team who are always pretty tricky. I suppose the obvious question, given you're involved in coaching, is how's your week's prep been?
Yeah, week's prep's been good. It's been a nice, dynamic, because this week's obviously half term, so that means all 3 of us are around coaching wise all of the time. I think for us, it's about not getting too far ahead of ourselves. It's about paying respect to Panthers. We know they're a really classy outfit, and we saw that last week with how close they came to a really strong London Pulse side. So we're really consistent. We've dissected them like we have any other opponent. We've broken them down the same way that we have any other opponent. The team have got a really, really set game plan of where they know we need to be successful versus where we hope we can break down a Birmingham Panthers side. But look, it's away from home, it's on a Sunday, it's in an ice rink, it's going to be pretty cold. There's a lot of variables in that for us. So however, with Forest playing on Saturday, we'll know where we're at. We'll know what we need to do. It will be in our hands. I don't think we'll speak too heavily on that or look at that too heavily. I think for us, a bit like how we face or look down the barrel of a Forest game last week, it will be process, one step at a time. If we do that right, then everything else will take care of itself. And even after that, we've still got 2 rounds to go, still got 2 very difficult games to play, one of which is at home for us in an OVO arena, Wembley, which we absolutely want to make sure we put the best account of ourselves on possible. So yeah, game by game, but yeah, looking forward to what will be. And I was away last time we played Birmingham Panthers. I haven't actually seen them in the flesh, so for me, I'm excited. I'm excited to see them up close and see what we can do against them.
Yeah, and 8 years it is, which feels ridiculous for a team like Mavericks to have not
Mental.
been in the top 4. That is obviously. I think I remember speaking to Tamsin earlier. We spoke to Raz after one of the games, and like that very much clearly would be a real kind of hurdle to overcome. I don't think you can underestimate that sort of thing.
Yeah, of course. And look, for years, Mavericks have wanted to get that monkey off their back. This year, certainly, with the whole rebrand and re-ownership, and the club really has been forthright in a new direction of travel. And that's been really clear from our owners. And I've really loved that. I respond so well to that. And I think the players have as well. People like Raz, who have been around the franchise for so many years, she really, really is desperate to get back in the finals contention. For players like that, for an Eli Ratu, who's been a captain for a number of years, separate to that, for the fans, we cannot underestimate how important and how much the fans have shown up for us this year. That last game at HSV, they were so loud. Week on week, they have, gone up a gear in terms of the number of fans we've sold tickets to, their capacity. 3,000 strong at Wembley is absolutely no mean feat, and now we're selling out home crowds. And I think that's where I really place a lot of onus to the playing group in terms of, this is about how the manner in which we go about our business and the feeling that you leave people who have parted with their hard-earned money is. That is really important to me, and therefore has become really important to us as a club. So I think for us that's been really key this season. And yeah, as I say, we've stared that top 4 title right in the face all season long, but now it's just about living true to that, and now it's near. We can't be scared of it, right? We can't have it both ways.
Absolutely. And the other team who are obviously very much in the mix for this are Forest, but they have probably the toughest task of anyone at the moment because, as we've said, Lightning are banging form, like it's 7 wins in a row. But Forest have beaten them before. They'll take an awful lot out of that. It's in the same venue as well, which I think, as much as it's a Lightning home game, I think we could all agree that the Motor Point is very much a Forest venue.
Well, it's a difficult that one, isn't it? It's a weird one when they're sharing arenas. I absolutely know Loughborough will do everything they can to change the feel in that stadium and the branding and everything else. But I mean, there's loads of Forest fans travelled to us last week, so I'm certain that if you're a Forest supporter, you are going to make sure you come in your.
Will you guys? I suppose it's Saturday afternoon at 4:00, so you probably won't watch it together. Will you keep an eye on it, Mikki? You're a netball nerd like everybody else.
I mean, you've known me for a very long time, Paul. What do you think the answer to that question is going to be? But I am an absolute netball nerd. If I am not looking at footage of us training or dissecting stats of us personally, then I am watching an SSN fixture, keeping up with an ANZ fixture, re-watching a game from NSL. So of course I'm going to be all over it. We actually have training on Saturday in the morning, so we'll be in together in the morning. We go for a team brunch after, which I'm very excited about. And then we won't be watching it together, but I'm certain. I mean, our groups are, netball players are a bit of a weird one. You either get most of them like me, who absolutely hang on every single result, and then you've got the complete polar opposite, who couldn't tell you what happened in any other round known to man, other than, oh, we're playing that team next, so I should probably look at some footage of them. So the group, most teams are real split down the middle between those two. So, and as I say, it doesn't change anything for us. We're not in a situation where if that Forest result goes one way, it automatically means X for us. We still have a job to do regardless. So, I could bet my life that we wouldn't even talk about it. We turn up on Sunday, and we are so all systems go on what our tactical job is, and we just get on with it.
And I suppose for Lightning as well, they're keen to sort of secure a top spot. So they're looking to keep their momentum going. Pulse, the other side, in the mix for that sort of top spot at the moment. Depending on how results go, there could be a chance of Thunder nicking it. Pulse against Rhinos, their last game at the Copper Box. And as we've said before, Pulse have been a little bit sticky and played more in fits and starts than perhaps they were in the first sort of 6 or 7 rounds. But I think it's worth bearing in mind that their body of evidence is still like a top of the table kind of team, right?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, they're still top of the table, right? So if you're them, you go, I don't know what all the fuss is around, because we're sitting pretty at the top of the tree, and they would be absolutely right. So yeah, as much as coming into form at the right time is obviously really important and on all of our minds as coaches. All that matters is that you get 3 points at the end of the day. No one's going back and going, well, you lose a point because you didn't do it. No one cares. Just get the win. So Pulse will be saying, last home game at the Copper Box against a team I am certain they would be saying at the start of the season they needed to get 2 wins off of. And that's no disrespect to a Leeds Rhino side. Of course, they can beat anyone on their day. But Pulse will be just saying there are certain games that we just need to get the job done, and this is one of them, and then we can start looking ahead to what comes next after that.
And for Rhinos and for Dragons, so that who play Thunder, who kind of have their own agenda to secure their own top 4 place, what will Rhinos and Dragons be looking to get out of these last few weeks? Because it's obviously tough. They're not in the mix for sort of a top 4 place. How do teams kind of who are not in the mix go about it? Is it simply a case of sort of just trying to put yourself in the best possible position for next year? Because as you alluded to sort of through this pod, in the back of everyone's mind is planning for next year.
Well, yeah, absolutely. With 3 rounds from teams like that being it, you literally closing up shop for summer. So it now becomes a one eye on next year if you're out of that top 4 and you've got essentially playing for pride. Pride is obviously really important. They've still got home games in the middle of that. So in their changing rooms, they'll be sitting there saying, we want to end the season on a high for our fans. That's really important, of course. No one wants to finish the league sitting at the bottom. And it's still pretty tight in between those teams. So they'll be saying it is absolutely more than possible for us. And you've also got individual players who will be going, playing for a spot in a 10 next year, whether that's maintaining my position in this one or keeping an eye on, potentially relocating, whether that's because of study reasons or university reasons or personal reasons. So there's a whole heap at stake. Coaches ultimately just want to make sure they're trying to win the game that's in front of them, right? So, they will absolutely be going into these last couple trying to keep motivation levels high, and absolutely with an eye on next year.
As if by magic. Chloe, you're back.
She's back. She's back.
How was your holiday?
Yeah, it was lovely. So good to be away.
But so good to be away, but then also to come back. So desperate to get some input into the latest podcast.
Obviously, that's what we're here for. But yeah, when you put out an England announcement, I have to come.
Well, yeah, that's. I mean, we kind of teased it. We anticipated that it might be on its way. And obviously, like on Thursday, part of the reason why we delayed the pod was because we knew it was coming. As well, a huge squad of 24 athletes named. That's for the 25-26 season. That's how it works, right? Players are allowed to opt in or opt out. And I think we should caveat the squad by saying, other than Taylor McKevitt, who I've seen on social. Chloe, you seen anybody else?
Not on social media, but I've been told that Elliot McCormick is another one that opted out.
So that's a couple of players who we know kind of didn't put their hat into the ring. And obviously, as we've already seen, there's been plenty of chat and plenty of debate as to why certain people are in and certain people are out. We'll get into some of the nuance around the conversation, but just very quickly, I've broken this down as best I can. I've got it as 3 goalkeepers in terms of first choice position: Halima Adio, Jazz Brown, and Raz Kwashi. Then in defence, Beth Cobden, Zara Everett, Fumi Fidoju, Tash Pavlin, Fran Williams, Yomi Wilson is probably the big surprise name in there. And then we'll have Imogen Allison as sort of that defence, but then moving into centre, mid-court. Then Amy Carter, Nat Metcalf, Lois Pearson, Ellie Ratu, Emma Rayner, Alicia Scholes, Jess Shaw, And then from attacking point of view, we've got Ellie Cardwell, Sasha Glasgow, Helen Houseby, Berry Neal, Liv Sheen, Anya Williams, and Paige Reed. I think that's roughly broke it down into areas. Chloe, anything immediately leap out to you from a talking points point of view?
Well, I think you kind of hedged me a little bit, but yeah, I think the player that is not in a Super League team being named to the England Roses is quite surprising, isn't it?
Yeah, I think just for a bit of background, Yomi Wilson is obviously part of the Thunder pathway and she's in the next gen squad, but hasn't seen the court this year. It's the one area perhaps that Thunder haven't had some defensive problems, to be honest. They've, apart from Nicholas Smith coming back, it is a bit of a surprise, and I think you tie it into maybe one or two names who aren't in the squad. Jada Pekova in particular is a name that's kind of come out. She's in the Futures squad. Yeah, I kind of don't know where I stand. It feels to me like a decision has been made on Yomi's potential, and the time is right to expose her to an international environment. I suppose there are positives and negatives to that.
Yeah, I think you're right. So for a bit of context as well, so she was in the Roses Academy in 2021 and then promoted up into Futures 2023 and then last year in 2024. So she's been ticking along England's radar for a while. But I just think it's that disconnect between sort of next gen NSL and international netball.
Yeah.
To me, that's just, I don't, it sort of screams we have a defending sort of problem, or maybe, I don't know, like, I guess you, like you said, that there are two ways of framing it. We knew with the retirement of Jiva Mentor from the international netball, we knew that was coming, and we were all saying at the time, what are England going to do? What are England going to do? What are England going to do? And didn't feel like England were doing anything. And now we're in a position where it seemed to be blooding someone in potentially very, very early. So it feels like two extremes in a way. Like we weren't ready for that part handover. And now, you know, and by that I mean we named some very, very old and experienced, but sort of players to a Commonwealth Games team in 2022. People remember that was very old, and then now we're sort of doing the reverse. But for me, it's also what it says about Thunder, that I don't know if it you know, it's a strange thing to sort of do to an NSL team when you're going underneath it,
Especially when you consider maybe the options. And again, we have to caveat all of this by saying that certainly in this instance, as you've mentioned there, Leah McCormick and Taylor McKevitt are players who have opted out. But I kind of was drawn to, I suppose, maybe two names in the Futures squad, and that's Alice Harvey and Jada Pekova, who maybe would feel a little bit more aggrieved. Perhaps they're more goalkeeper than maybe all round than Yomi. I feel disconnect is a really good word, because we know that Super League and England Netball are very much intertwined, but equally both have very different agendas now as we embark on this professional era. And it does feel like to bring in someone who really hasn't played in the Super League this year, it feels, I don't know, just feels slightly strange. I suppose the immediate parallel when I was trying to think about this and covering other sports was when England called up Theo Walcott as a 16-year-old to play in a World Cup, and he'd never even played a Premier League match. So I suppose that's the closest thing to a precedent I can see for it. And look, maybe in time we'll get a chance to have a chat with Jess Thirlby and maybe some of the selectors and just sort of get a little bit of an idea about what the planning is, because clearly it's a plan, right? You look there at that defence, and there's a huge amount of experience in there, first of all. So clearly it must be part of a bigger plan, and it would be interesting to get an idea on that plan.
Yeah, and maybe, so she made 9 appearances for Thunder in 2022 in NSL, and then I think has been struggling with injury and then not called back up in. So she has been on an NSL court, but I think the thing is, perhaps it's a case. Maybe we're putting words in people's mouths, but she's too good for the Futures environment and to be in the Roses environment, but maybe won't see court time anytime soon. I don't know. Like, yeah, as you said, it's all about planning and what's coming down the line and height.
Yeah.
That's a big part of it, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
There is some tall timber in the rest of the world. We've got some of it in this league, and that's always been a bit of an issue. So yeah, I think that's one of the big things that sticks out to me. Another, Paul, is we have one player in that Roses team with centre as first position.
Don't get me started. This is not new, is it, Chloe? To be
This
fair,
is a safe space.
this is not new. For Chloe in the Super Shot, see Paul Prenderville and England centres. This is not a new phenomenon. And if we're honest as well, like I'm very much an Amy Carter fan, I know you are as well. She's not been like a first choice centre for England, has she? Really, at the time she's been in the squad, she's sort of been in and out of it. Imogen Allison, who I kind of listed as a defender, and I think we probably all agree is probably at her best at wing defence. We're even seeing that in SSN at the moment. I suppose nominally she's kind of the next centre, herself and Amy Carter. But Ellie Ratu is kind of been a consistent in the Mavericks squad, but over the last few weeks is kind of maybe losing her place a little bit to Amy Hepworth-Wain. And then after that, you're getting into sort of Alicia Scholes, Zara Everett and Emma Rayner, who would probably put centre as their second or third choice position. It feels like iffy to me, and I think it's an area where we are short of real quality.
Yeah, I completely agree. And internationally, I think as well, you might argue there's a little bit of a drought going on. It really depends if Nolene lets loose her mid-court engine. But
it's a good point though, Chloe, actually, because just as you mentioned that, I thought in my head, maybe do we put so much emphasis as a sport, not just in this country, on winning ball and turning ball over, that we kind of forget of just how important that sort of metronome in the middle of the court to knit everything together is. And Lightning are flying at the moment, and Nat Panagari is just constantly there, just ticking them over like non-stop. And yeah, you're right, there is a dearth maybe across the world.
I think, when you look at Liz Watson, like, she does a job, and she does her job really consistently, really, really well. But it's a kind of, I feel for me, the mid-court is an area that takes a lot of time and skill, and it's very structured and it's very deliberate. So you have to want to know how your mid-court are to play, and then you have to hope that they're fit enough to consistently deliver that at international level. Like, I think that's something that Nolene Tarua has been sort of dragged over the coals a little bit for, her emphasis on fitness. But like, when you look at the way that mid-court goes and goes and goes and goes and has to go again and has to go again, I think that is a key part of the picture. But to come back to England for a second, like, I do think that is an issue, like, that one player is down for centre first. Like, it just, and I don't, as you said, like, Imogen Allison has been more favoured at wing defence out in SSN, and I think the general consensus is, watching Imogen play in Firebirds, is people just kind of forget that she's there. Like, she's not making a mark in a big way. She's doing a job, but it's not like, wow, this is an international player we've brought over to like be a dynamo in our midcourt. So, they've got 2 wins at the halfway mark, the Firebirds, and there's a lot of problems and history behind the Firebirds as a club, but Alison was part of that new blood that was supposed to come in and sort of reinvigorate it. And I think everyone's just sort of been like, I guess, like, not underwhelmed or overwhelmed, but kind of whelmed by Imogen, which means that she's probably in the right place and she could progress and get better. But we are seeing her at that wing defence. So yeah, I think Ellie Ratu, as you've said, I think that's a really interesting point as well, that as we get to the business end and it gets stickier, she's coming out of the centre position. So, what does that mean internationally if if the ball feeds and stuff aren't going in? So yeah, curious. Because also with wing attack, you've got Lois Pearson as well, that gives you, I think English netball has, with Nat Metcalf as well, you got that wing attack, goal attack slide, which is very niche, and when done very well is excellent. But I don't know, I don't like it.
No, I agree with you. I think Amy should have probably been our starting centre for at least 18 months now, and had some sort of consistency to that. I think we're not far away from Commonwealth Games, and would anyone be able to confidently predict who England's starting centre would be? No, they wouldn't at the minute. And maybe this is the chance for this cohort to kind of cement places and connections and the rest of it as it goes. You mentioned that Metcalf there. She's in. Obviously, she's missed Super League season, having had her first baby. She plans, and according to the press release, has every intention of kind of coming back to full netball. So obviously, we'll see how she returns. Lois Pearson, obviously, was probably one of the big breakthrough stars of the last international cycle. Feels like Emma Rayner might be that person this time out, and should she get the opportunity, I think we're pleased to see her rewarded. Susie Liversidge probably can feel a little bit unlucky not to be in the squad, but she's in the futures pathway. And then obviously Alicia Scholes and Jess Shaw kind of round out that sort of wing attack option. Any feelings on that?
Yeah, and we also don't really know the situation with Hannah Joseph, because she went from roses to nowhere. I think overall we should probably say that this opt-in, opt-out situation is odd.
Yeah, very
odd that you have.
You and I have messaged that back and forth quite a bit.
Yeah, odd that you have to be asked to put your hand up, and then odd that it's not communicated when you've declined or said no. Yeah, I think that's just it just makes this all a bit difficult, doesn't it? Between you and I, in terms of unpicking all of this without knowing. But that is a big one, to go from Hannah Joseph, who was, went out in the autumn last year, to do that really big two big test series, to then not appear at all is odd. And I guess, Jess Shaw may be a beneficiary of circumstance in a way, with the way she came into that wing attack position, given that in that autumn test series, as you alluded to, where Lois Pearson sort of broke through, Jess was given time at wing attack because Nat Metcalf was out, and Lois needed to slide into goal attack because Elle Cardwell was also out. So there is also this sort of situation. I don't know, for me, if Jess Shaw is the kind of name that makes a Commonwealth Games sheet, but should she be in the environment as well, just to kind of enrich this wing attack conversation that we always seem to be having with England as well? But to
We've got a lot of wing attacks as opposed to centres, isn't
it? It's kind of like, and it is well, I don't know, because we went from too many wing defences to swinging heavy towards wing attack. So yeah, maybe there's a nuance that's, I don't know. What do you reckon?
I honestly don't know, because I genuinely thought we were short and maybe undervalued the wing attack position to a certain point, and we just kind of maybe took Nat Metcalf for granted a little bit as well, as in that, like, she's always going to be there. You mentioned it with Jiva as well. I feel like we've got options, which is a good thing. I feel like they're good options, and like we said, sort of, if you look underneath the hood and you've got Susie Liversidge, who's kind of maybe the next cab off the rank. I always use the floors analogy in sport, and I feel like that's a really good thing, that Susie's had such a brilliant season, is maybe our kind of fifth choice at the minute, if you go by how the squads have been picked. An area I find interesting as well is the attack end. I think we've spoken a bit about maybe kind of not a lack of quality, but kind of depth, I think is the thing we speak about here. And I think if you rattle through this list, Ellie Cardwell, really bad injury. Sasha Glasgow, thankfully fit and playing, but a horrendous injury, and is back in the environment after a year out. Paige Reed is just back last weekend for Thunder. And then if you want those who are untouched by injury, you've kind of got Helen Housby, Berry Neal, Liv Sheen, and then Anya Williams, who I think another one, to your point about being really tall and a product and a project to sort of work with in the sort of seasons ahead. I feel like we've got options there, but where would you start that if you were England, and you had a World Cup must-win game tomorrow morning?
Go on, that's a tough one. Hey, it depends who's fit. I mean, depends where Cardwell, what happens to Cardwell, what happens to the Mavericks over in SSN, because that's obviously where Sasha and Elle play. But yeah, I think Cardwell was such a big thing for England. Like, I was always in awe of when she was at her best. She was unstoppable. Helen Housby also is having a super season. There has been some narrative in Australia about her basically being a second wing attack, and every now and again Helen sort of challenges that, I think, with her, the super shot ability. But what a thing to behold, watching her play with grace and just sort of showing how she can work a holding shooter like that. So I think she's in a great spot. We can all agree, like, that's good. They'll probably win, the Swifts. It would be amazing if someone had actually called that.
There's one outrageous prediction for someone to have
I don't know who
suggested that they might not even make the top 4.
I don't know who that was. Yeah, I think what will be interesting is, Berry Neal has, I think, been getting better.
Yes, absolutely.
So is there more of a place for her now? I think Lois Pearson was so effective. Like, I think if you're Berry Neal, you probably looked at that and went, oh, shucks. Because, like, let's imagine for a 12, you're bringing 3 to 4 shooters. If Helen and Ella in, and you go Liv Sheen, who also had another great international period, kind of in tandem with Lois Pearson. So you got to think, that's probably not an accident, given how Lois, gave her the ball, etc. Where does that leave Berry in that conversation? Where does that put Sasha in that conversation? We haven't really seen that much of Sasha, obviously, because of the injury, but even before that, it was a bit awkward, her entrance into the Roses. So options. But I think one of the things I always come back to when it comes to an England team, and I think it's a Tamsin Greenway nugget, it's like, okay, you have lots of great players. We're not in a dispute of that, but it's how the netball you want to play. How does it stitch together? Because you can have a Jess Shaw, but she really used to throwing a ball into a tall standing shooter. Is that the England attack shooting end that you want to play? And I think particularly true of the attack end is, how do you want it to function? And then also you've got to keep your eye on what the rest of the world is doing in that way, because with your defence end, it's like, do I have an arsenal enough to take out Grace Wecke, to take out Sophie Garbin, Kira Austin, Cara, because Australia have, it's like a joke. Stacey Marinkovic has all the styles with her 4 shooters. Like, can England replicate that? Can we be doing something like that? I think with those players you might be able to, but you got to then think about the balls coming in and what that looks like, and how and who you want to deliver those to make those a possibility. I think when you have Liz Watson on your team, you can kind of do any circle. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I kind of think the same. I think we should probably obviously always say as well, we're at the start of an international kind of cycle. This squad has been picked for the next sort of 12 months in mind, and kind of let's see how it shakes out. As has been pointed out on several occasions, like, it does feel like the international season is bizarrely longer than like a domestic season. I'm very keen to see how it kind of shakes out. It feels like there's been a bit of change, which I think has been a good thing, but maybe not quite enough, I feel like. But maybe that's being harsh, because, I don't think there are too many players who you would say probably should be in there. Am I pushing that? I think maybe Cassie Howard could feel a little bit unlucky, but this has been a breakthrough, really, hasn't it? It's not like she's got a huge body of work.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is, and this would be a great question to put to Jess Thirlby, is like, and she probably won't answer it, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, but because it's probably not an easy thing to answer, but Super League form is probably not having that much of a say in this.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like, what percentage are those final couple of games at whatever point in the round when these letters were sent out, did this really affect what was going on here? So, I think what happens now probably helps next year, rather than, what's happening now informing this year.
Yeah.
So I think, because I look at that Roses squad and I think, fair enough, mostly fair enough, based on what we have. I think the bit that feels why we all feel like, oh, it's a bit, oh, like, what is it? It's because we know, is it good enough for what is out there? That to me is the like, it's not actually who is in specifically and who's out. Is that overall picture, is it enough to take on what we've been saying on this podcast, Paul, is a rising South Africa, a dominant Australia, a New Zealand with an amazing goal shooting prospect, backed by players we know are tried and tested, and Jamaica. I don't know. I think that's the kind of like, oh God, that feeling.
I think that's really fair, and I think how the connections are built is probably going to be the key to this, because I think whether England netball and Jess like it or not, we'll come to a point now at the end of this cycle where they're kind of going to be judged, obviously, as you mentioned, against really very, very good teams now. and it's not just can we catch up to Australia and New Zealand and keep pace with Jamaica. It's like South Africa are coming fast, and we've spoken to a few players now who have all been of the opinion that we're going to medal. Like that is a definitive goal for them. So yeah, I think it'd be interesting to get Jess's thoughts. I think that's probably where I would come down now, and then let's see how it shakes out. Right, I think they're the big things, because the squad's been named. We know what that sort of party looks like now, and it's how do those combinations sort of sit together, and how do we see them grow and see them develop. I think that's really, because there's no going back, really, is there? There's com games, so it's like it's kind of now or never, really.
Exam is coming. How
Yeah.
are you preparing? I suppose the other thing we ought to say is, and one thing that I would like to ask Jess is, what exactly is the definition of futures? I think that's something that you and I kind of, when we looked at this list, kind of talked around with players coming down. So we talked about sort of who's come up, but like players coming down. Alice Harvey, Jada Pekova, Emma Thacker, Vicky Oyasola is out. Hannah Joseph is out. So there's this, but what does that mean for a player when you were a Rose and you come back down to futures? And then also, I think that people will probably be asking, well, the word future indicates someone like Shannon Malik or Gracie Smith. And maybe I'm answering my own point, because earlier I said maybe the Super League season doesn't really have that much to do in informing these decisions that are made now. And, you know, these two have done super young and they've come on and they've done a job. So maybe they'll be around next year. But it feels a bit nebulous, this kind of futures thing, and what its purpose is. Is it a reserves now? In which case, yeah, I don't know. Do you see what I mean?
No, I absolutely see what I mean. I think the question is a really good one, and I think, obviously we're new to the podcast game, but I think you and I have sort of chatted about this a little bit. Is how does that whole process stack up, and kind of, are you putting a couple of players in there to bring some experience to a very youthful kind of environment and kind of help them through that? Yeah, I think it would be an interesting one to ask, because I was actually just going to mention Shannon and Gracie there, because they're also part of the extended squad for the Under-21 World Cup as well, which is something we'll kind of see open up in the weeks ahead. So yeah, look, I think an interesting squad, a squad full of talking points. I think whenever you throw together an international squad, it allows people to kind of converse and debate and all those things. But I think the proof will be in the pudding, as you kind of really well put there. It's like the exam's coming, and it's like, okay, how ready are we? And I'm not sure. We'll find that out.
And maybe a word on Jada Pekova.
Oh yeah, of
because
course.
I think that's probably the person that people feel the most aggrieved for, given her form. And then, other than just repeating the point that we made about Super League, I just wanted to go over roughly her time in the Roses, because I think that's important. 6 caps she has. This is all according to the England Netball website, where it did list Yomi as being 1.82 millimeters.
Millimeters.
Check your notes, guys. Future Roses program for the first time in 2020. No, she made the Roses program. No, Future Roses program, pardon, 2022-23. Made a senior debut in the Tani Jameson series in 2023. She played 1 game in the 2024 Nations Cup against Uganda, where she came off the bench in the 3rd quarter. 1 intercept, 7 penalties, 3 games, according to Champion Data. Wasn't named against Australia, wasn't named against Silver Ferns, didn't travel to Australia or New Zealand in autumn, and wasn't in the 2025 Netball Nations Cup squad. She's maybe not been the flavour for a while,
Yeah,
but
possibly,
she's been in the environment for a time. But she's still young. So she was born in 2004. So maybe there's a not right now, or maybe it's a height thing. But yeah, I think that was just interesting to sort of lay out a bit.
No, it's good to put it like that as well. And look, as I say, I think we'll probably debate this for a fair bit once we get beyond the Super League. But Chloe, I'm not going to keep you any longer. You've dashed back to get in on the podcast front. We're going to rush this one out and get it ready for Friday. Thanks to Mikki Austin. Listen to it, Chloe. She was wicked, really good in particular on kind of Surrey Storm, which I think it was a really interesting part of the conversation, because we've spoken to people who've been successful in kind of coming through that tender process last year, and for Storm, like Bath, like Stars, like Sirens, it was really sort of heartbreaking, and Mikki spoke really, really well on that. So listen to it, and as ever, drop us a rating, anyone else, and sort of stick with us for the ride. a big weekend in the Super League, and we'll be back to review it next week.
Thanks, everyone.